Reservist availability must be matched with a predictable funding stream or critical training is postponed. Delayed training is difficult to reschedule and places an increased burden on the one resource we can't buy back, that being time. Our second concern as we continue to strengthen our competitive edge is the loss of our technician force of pilots and aircraft maintainers to the contract and commercial industry. Retention of our technician force is essential to maintaining our lethality and combat effectiveness. We have taken steps over the past year to increase the retention of our technician force, but work still remains. One area this committee can be of great assistance is to support legislation to authorize dual status Air Reserve technicians medical coverage under TRICARE Reserve Select. Your support is vital to enhance continuity of care for our Air Reserve technicians and their families while they perform our nation's call. Supporting this initiative would do more for the retention of our critical technician force than any action over the past few years, and the time is now. TRICARE Reserve Select for Air Reserve technicians bolsters the nation's defense. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your unwavering support of our incredible Air Force, our Reserve, citizen airmen and their families. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, General Rydholm. We appreciate your first appearance before the subcommittee and best wishes for your continued success, and thank you. You returned the sound. Each member of the subcommittee will have 5 minutes of questions to our panel. It will be strictly maintained by Ms. Margaret Dean, and beginning with me, strictly maintained. And General Nolan, the Air Force is approximately 2,000 pilots short of the requirement. This pilot shortfall continues to worsen, and essential training aircraft like the T-6 and T-38 have been plagued by increasing maintenance challenges, and most recently, the entire T-6 fleet was grounded due to the onboard oxygen generating system failing to provide adequate oxygen to these trainee pilots. I have serious concerns about the training these pilots of the aircraft with an average age of 55 years old and over 16,000 flight hours. Congress has supported a new trainer aircraft, the TX, yet the contract award has been delayed. How is it possible for the Air Force to adequately address the pilot shortfall without an on-time delivery of the TX training aircraft?
Congressman Wilson, thank you for that question. It's a fabulous question and one that I'm deeply concerned about also. Our T6 fleet, as I said, is critical towards our ability. It's our basic trainer. We are looking holistically to solve that from a material solution, from an education solution, from a training solution, to get that fleet back up on its, that aircraft back up on its feet as soon as possible and back up into the air. The TX, the good news for the TX is that the decision was delayed a little bit because of our acquisition professionals wanted to make sure we got it correct, but we have money in this budget to move forward on the TX, and I'm with you. We need to have that airplane delivered on time. We, the Air Force, believe because of the nature of the aircraft, we're hopeful that there will be little to no delays as we move through that. And part of the delay is to make the decision, I understand, was to make sure that we have the best choice so if a protest came, we could move it forward as quickly as possible. And as far as our numbers, sir, and retention, you're exactly right. We know that retention is critical, but guess what? Production is critical. The way we really get out of this situation is we have to, and our Secretary said it yesterday, increase our production to 1,400 undergraduate pilot training graduates per year and grow out of this problem. Retention numbers are difficult to chase. Industry is always there. We have over 60 initiatives, one of which is a monetary bonus, and we're using the authority that you've given us to try to adjust that bonus to maximize the potential. But in the end, we believe growing pilots for America and for the United States Air Force is in our best interest, and that's what we intend to do.
And I appreciate your commitment on that. And as we talk about the TX contract, what would be the time frame which you anticipate that a decision will be made?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not in the acquisition. What I have seen is just what you've seen. I believe it's in the spring or summertime is when the selection will be made, and then hopefully we'll move in a rapid acquisition. And as you see in the money in our budget, we have a large section of money as we move into the future to start purchasing that airplane.
Well, that's very encouraging, and again, we appreciate your efforts to expedite. And then for each of you, the latest projections for rebuilding the readiness are based on setting conditions for readiness recovery. What percentage of readiness will the Air Force reasonably attain, and by what time frame? What are there particular core functions that are more at risk than others in terms of the readiness recovery efforts? How does the FY19 Department of Air Force budget request impact the recovery plan for the operational readiness? And actually, we'll begin with General Rice.
Thanks for that question, Chairman. In light of things the Guard is specifically doing to increase readiness, first, we're hand in hand with the Air Force in growing our end strength and filling in those gaps and seams. The second thing was not only did General Nolan talk about production of brand new pilots, but the other two pieces that we have a big part in is the training of advanced pilots in our formal training units, as well as the next step, which is absorption of those pilots into our force. To increase our ability to absorb across the total force, Guard, Reserve, and active duty, we've increased things like second shift maintenance to get after some of these. So we've put resources of people and parts, supplies, and flying hours into that to increase our readiness.
Thank you very much. And my time is up, but General Reitholm, thank you again for being here. And I was particularly happy to see you're a graduate of the Naval Academy. As a Naval Academy grad dad, I am very appreciative. So best wishes, and we now proceed to Guam with Congressman Badillo.
All the way to Guam? You said
So
proceed
close.
to Guam.
It's just,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, I have two questions for General Nolan. But I just want to say, General Rice, thank you for paying such great attention to the Guard units on Guam, particularly the Air Guard. General Rowland, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm concerned about what I see in the FY19 budget request for operations and maintenance funding, and specifically in key readiness enabling accounts, such as those that support weapon system sustainment. And note that in the sum, the FY19 request appears to be roughly the same amount as FY18 levels. However, approximately $5 billion has been shifted from the base request to OCO. Now, can you explain to us the reason for this shift and also quantify the level of risk the Air Force is taking in weapon system sustainment compared to the full requirement?
Madam Badillo, it's a great question, ma'am. So the exact answer of the shifting of the money, I will take for record and will answer, because we moved some money around as the budget was moved around. But in end, we're upping our weapon system sustainment by $400 million this year. We're also upping our flying hour money that we're paying for. So the answer is, as we're moving forward, 3 years ago we started to build maintainers. We anticipate next year we will grow those 3 levels, which are apprentice, into craftsmen into 5 levels. So we've put money in a weapon system sustainment so that we can hopefully increase our aircraft utilization rate by up 1 per sortie per month across the fleet, which will help us get in additional training. In addition, we've put money into our adversary air program at Nellis. So when pilots go to Nellis, every sortie they fly will be a blue air sortie as the goal, so that they are not taking their precious training time to act as an adversary, but act as a primary. We think those 2 actions will help us increase our readiness level as we move forward, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The second question also is for you, General. The quarterly readiness report to Congress identified 3 lines of effort to return Air Force pilot manning to required readiness levels. Now, one of those efforts included a significantly increased take rate for the pilot bonus, almost double that of last year. Now, I understand that the Air Force is pursuing a holistic approach to the retention problem and that the service has not found financial compensation to be a root cause of the pilot shortage. However, neither the quarterly report nor any department leadership has identified what changes will be made between last year and this year to achieve increased take rate percentage goals. So if pilot bonus take rate is one of the service's 3 main lines of effort, how exactly do you expect to meet your FY18 goal?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. The numbers that you may have appeared, I think, were mistaken. There was a number of 65% in there, which is what we used to measure what we thought we had to retain. Our actual retention, as you identified, is 43% last year, and it went down a little bit, but it only went down 1%. So that was, we thought that was a win. So how we're going to do, given the authorities you've given us, we're going to try to realign our bonus rate to try to keep our most important people, which are our instructors and our evaluators, across our weapons system to incentivize it as we look at the business case analysis. That's the first thing we're going to do. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on that production, because we cannot ultimately control what the airlines are going to do and how much money they're going to, but we're going to work on that production to try to increase the maximum production we can get to while simultaneously improving the quality of life with those 60 initiatives that we have to improve the quality of life so that their quality of service is what they want to accomplish.
Thank you, General. And I do have just a few seconds, but I'm going to yield back in the interest of time.
Thank you very much for your thoughtfulness, Congresswoman Badillo. And we now proceed to Congressman Austin Scott, Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your service. I disappointed in the recommendation, some of the recommendations from the Air Force. I would just ask you on one of our other weapon systems. The Air Force proposed several years ago, and unfortunately Congress allowed the canceling of the F-22 contract based on the promise that another plane was going to be available. Do you think it was a good decision to cancel the F-22 contract?
Congressman Scott, I assume that's for me, right?
Yes, sir.
The F-22 is, I'm an air superiority pilot. The F-22 has proved to be one of our greatest air superiority assets.
So would you agree that it was a mistake to cancel the contract?
I was not in the Secretary's decision space at that time. I know there was a lot of different factors that worked into that.
Let me rephrase it. Do you wish that we had maintained the contract? Do you wish that we had more F-22s? Would we be a stronger Air Force today if we had more F-22s?
The F-22 is an absolutely incredible air superiority. As we look to the future and great power competition, additional F-22s, I would estimate all combatant commanders would like to have more.
One of the other things that our combatant commanders would like to have is more ISR platforms. Excuse me. So every year, the Armed Services Committee, we've heard from the combatant commanders that they don't have the necessary ISR assets to support the geographic commands. The J-STARS continues to be highly requested asset inside the Department of Defense. General Nolan and Rice, what is the rationale behind the Air Force's decision to impose risk on combatant commanders with the divestment of 3 E-8C J-STARS aircraft in the FY19 proposed budget?
Congressman Scott, the long-term, the goal is to increase lethality and effectiveness for the combatant commanders by trying to disaggregate the moving target indicator capacity across the force. So we're going to maintain the J-STARS through the mid-20s. With that a while away, as we look at this idea of disaggregation to see if we can create an advanced battle management system that gives combatant commanders greater capacity and dismounted moving target indicator by modifying the MQ-9.
Thank you for that answer, General. But if I may, the Air Force's decision, they have told us repeatedly, is based on the fact that they don't believe that it's survivable in a contested airspace. So we have been told that the primary reason is that it's not survivable in contested airspace.
There are increased threats from our great power nations that do make it in a higher threat environment.
Well, General, if I may, just continuing along that, would you agree that those nations like Russia and China, that space is a contested environment and they are working on advanced technologies that would may make our ability to communicate from space impossible?
There is no doubt that space is becoming a contested environment, and our Air Force Space is looking at how we get in warfighting constructs. And to say impossible communication, sir, it's beyond the level of my knowledge, but certainly I think there'll be challenges in space.
But you would agree that they will have the ability to break our lines of communications?
I'm not.
There's a risk that they will be able to break our lines.
There is a risk towards our communications, of course. We know that they will always try to go after our communications capability.
All right. I know I'm getting a little short on time, and General Rice, I apologize that I cut you out of that, but I do need to go again, General Nolan, to the weapon system sustainment accounts. What steps are you taking to expedite the hiring in the depot workforce, the direct hiring as well as retention at our depots?
Our Air Force Material Command, General Palakowski, and working with our A1 is attempting to streamline that and reduce that timeline. Our goal, as you know, is to reduce that and get the skilled workers that we need to get out on the flight line as much as we can. So the efforts and the authorities that you've given us, the Air Force is acting on those and trying to implement those procedures.
Gentlemen, thank you. And I would point out to the committee that it was a mistake to cancel the F-22 contract. It would have been a mistake to allow the Air Force to get rid of the A-10 as they had proposed to. And it will be a mistake to allow the Air Force to stop the recapitalization of the JSTARS program. And with that, I yield the 6 seconds that I don't have.
And thank you, Congressman Scott. And we now proceed to Congressman Salud Carbajal of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. My question is regarding the sustainment of the F-35s. I don't understand how we can plan to sustain over 250 F-35 aircraft while we try to triple the size of the fleet by 2021, when there continues to be serious ongoing challenges to the program. Currently, F-35 repairs at the depots are 6 years behind schedule. There is a part shortage, leaving the aircraft unable to fly about 22% of the time in 2017. And the Autonomic Logistics Information System, ALIS, is facing development delays. We are essentially building new aircraft to be quickly deemed not mission capable. This is a readiness challenge, as we will not have full functioning F-35s for our pilots to train or operate on. It is my understanding that ALIS has yet to be rolled out because of key remaining deficiencies. What is the status of ALIS? How is all of this impacting our readiness and the ability for our pilots to train and deploy with these aircrafts?
Congressman Carbajal, thank you for that question. We have deployed a squadron, the 34th Fighter Squadron, on a theater security package into the Pacific AOR. So the problems that you highlight talk about the system in general, and as we look at the system in general, there are absolute challenges in sustainment and cost. And our Secretary of the Air Force is actively working with the Deputy Secretary of Defense to try to drive costs down and performance measures on the ALIS, Autonomic Logistics Information System. However, what we've seen from our deployed forces is that those F-15s that are forward, the Air Force, and as well as the Marine F-35s, are performing well downrange, and they are actually making fourth generation better. So it's a challenge as we grow the system with the parts, because we are still building airplanes, and it's an international program. They're trying to work through it. Our logisticians are working with the Joint Program Office to streamline that as best they can.
I appreciate your answer, but I will tell you that it would be great if we could somehow get some kind of action plan that identifies all these deficiencies and some timelines by which we hope to be able to overcome these challenges. Because if not, your statement, as great as it sounds, it's pretty hollow. So it would be great for us to know what is the Air Force action plan to address these issues and the time frame by which to do it.
We will take that and give you a written answer on that. So that way we can provide that to you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Congressman Carbajal. We now proceed to Congressman Dr. Scott Desjardins of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. General Rice, good to see you again. As you know, Tennessee has a strong Guard presence all across the state, and something we're very proud of. And our Air Guard, in particular, carried out an exceptional set of important missions that contribute to our national security on a daily basis. General James Hecker of the U.S. Central Command recently stated that we have 50% more MQ-9 drones providing ISR capabilities in Afghanistan than we had a year ago. For obvious reasons, RPAs have become very popular with our combatant commands, and the Air Force budget reflects that demand with its request to procure 8 peacetime and 21 OCO Reaper drones. So my question is, what does the combat line growth and procurement increase mean for National Guard RPA missions?
Thanks for that question, sir. And bottom line, thanks for your support, too, of our Guard. We can't do it alone. We need your help as we work hand in hand on how we present forces across the total force, Guard, active, and reserve. As far as RPA specific, it is a building block approach. So not only is it just the platforms to put up, but it's also the ground control stations and it's the processing, exploitation, and dissemination of the data. And so parts and pieces of that are growing in Tennessee, and we're putting in platforms, newer platforms of MQ-9s into Tennessee as we field those over the next few years. That's our part, that's our role right now, to expand that capability within the National Guard across all of our units that we have fielded, which includes Tennessee.
Okay. In follow-up to that, in regards to RPA launch and recovery elements, during the recent California wildfires, we saw firsthand the critical role RPAs can have in assisting first responders. How many domestic LREs do we currently have, and are there plans to prop up more LRE missions?
Our goal is to have 5 units with LREs. We have 2 at each one of our training units in New York in March, and then we have 3 other units that are receiving the launch and recovery elements too. Once we get to that level, I think we'll be able to maintain the weapon system for a while on a good balance between home station training and response in the homeland, as well as be able to deploy one of the 5 at any time to meet Air Combat Command missions.
We'd be happy to host one of those in Nashville, by the way.
Noted, sir. Duly noted.
And also, because we're on that subject, we'd love to have you back down to Tennessee soon, and I want to reiterate how perfectly situated the 164th is to host an Aeromed squadron, should there be mission growth in that area. General Noland, yesterday this group was at a Armed Services retreat, and Deputy Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan used an anecdote talking about the repair times for aircraft, and he gave an example of a Southwest airliner 737. If it had a part problem, I think he used a flap as an example, that could be procured, replaced, and the plane could be flying within 24 hours. But put that same 737 in a military skin, it may take 6 months just to get the part and 3 months to repair it. First of all, is that an accurate description? And if so, considering that 50% of our airplanes are in poor repair and not ready to fly, how do we solve that problem?
Thank you very much. It's an interesting question for me. I'm not positive, given the facts, that I can say if it's true or not true. Certainly, we have unique part sets where our logistics system doesn't, where we sit, and we measure that. And remember, we call it S time and then B time, which is technical term for how much we're sitting. Our older airplanes absolutely have part problems. Our WC-135s, our older boutique airplanes have logistics challenges. some of our newer airplanes, as was pointed out, F-35. But for the most part, we've invested in weapon system sustainment. So our parts supply and our Defense Logistics Agency and our A4 is managing it, I would say, fairly well if you look at our metrics across. The other thing that we do in our small airplanes is we have what's called a CAN rate, which is where we take a part out and we take it and we move it. And right now, our cannibalization rate is very good. We're not doing that. So all indicators are across the majority of the fleet. We're looking pretty well. Our older airplanes, though, challenges.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We now proceed to Congressman Don McEachin of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and generals and Major General, thank you all for being here. And if you've already covered this, I apologize for my tardiness, but as we think about readiness and as we think about readiness, particularly where the Air Force is concerned, can you speak to me about pilots? And do you have enough pilots? Is there a pilot shortage? And how can we help you address that shortage if it exists?
That's one of my favorite questions. So thank you very much for asking it. Where we could help. Yes, we do have a pilot shortage. As you know, the numbers were about 2,000 pilots short, about 1,300 fighter pilots short. Where it really manifests itself mostly right now is in our staffs, which are our organizations which oversee, because we're continuing to reduce our staffs to keep our cockpits manned, which has a second-order effect. Where we need help, and I think that we're going to come to ask Congress for some help, is to increase our capacity. As we said, our Secretary said, our capacity needs to be at 1,400 per year, and we need to hold that steady. The question is, as was noted with the T6, we're challenged right now because that fleet's grounded. The TX is coming on board. So we have a group of ideas on how we could increase our production. And we are working through those ideas, and we would love to come into the future, once we get them mature, to share those with the committee on how we think we might need some help to continue to get after it. The other thing we're doing is we're experimenting. Our Air Education and Training Command, General Quast, is running an experiment on how do you reduce the amount of time that it takes to train a pilot, which therefore would increase your throughput. So we're looking at all avenues as we move forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman McEachin. We now proceed to Congressman General Trent Kelly of Mississippi.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here. General Nolan, just real quickly, you talked about the number of pilots increasing the throughput and the training of pilots on the entry level. Is that including the number included for the National Guard and Reserve to make sure that we have training seats? Because it doesn't matter. We've got to have the capacity to train, but it can't just be the active component. It's got to be also that capacity has to include those same pilots to go into the Guard and Reserve. Does your number you gave me include that earlier, the number you gave earlier?
Congressman Kelly, thank you. Great question. Absolutely includes our total force, Reserve, Guard, active duty, and it also includes a small sliver because our strategy says in, with, and through international partners. So there's some international production in there also.
Congressman, could I pick up a piece of that too, if I could, sir?
Yes.
To General Nolan's point, one of the things that we see across the Air Force Reserve is that we lose roughly, we have 3,500 pilots, and we lose roughly 10% per year. We get 100 training slots, so we need to be able to affiliate 250 active component airmen as they come off the active duty and come to us. One of the ways that we're looking at doing that is through a number of initiatives, one of them being special salary rates for our Air Reserve technicians, another being some other incentive bonuses and things. And then in addition to that, with the pure production piece that was just stated, we have contributed a number of airmen to the enterprise, maintenance airmen in particular, seasoned airmen in the Air Force Reserve that are helping at some of our large production formal training unit locations such as Luke Air Force Base and the F-16.
Thank you. And General Rice, you talked about the TRICARE Reserve Select and our federal technicians. I understand that. I'm actually looking at that, and that's something that's very important. It's important to me that when we have soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, whatever Reserve or National Guard or active component, if we're doing the same job on a daily basis, we shouldn't have different benefits. they should be exactly the same, and we shouldn't tell people because you're a Fed Tech, you can't get this TRICARE, you've got to pay more and have less benefits than someone else when their part-time, their full-time job supports the part-time job, and it's the same. And so I'm supportive of that. And General Rice, I just want to ask you, do you feel like you have the adequate number of training slots to make sure that we have the right number of Air Guard pilots trained and ready to go on a moment's notice?
Absolutely, sir. We definitely have the right number of training slots. As General Nolan referenced, this is a total force effort and on getting ahead on producing pilots, and we're right there hand in hand with them.
And General Rice, I guess this is for all of y'all, but I'll start with you. We shouldn't have the part problems that we have in getting parts there on time. And I understand PLL from an Army issue, and I don't know what you guys call it, but we call it PLL, and that's our basic load of parts that we know are going to break. And that is delegated way too far down to the level on some of those things. We should know what's breaking on F-35s. We should know what's breaking on A-10s and F-22s. And that's got to be readjusted every year at the highest level. But we should never be caught by surprise and have to wait 6 or 8 months for the same part 100 times in a year. That is poor management at some level. And so we really got to get better with all the computer systems. We know across the world what the break rate on A-10s are, or on F-35s or C-17s. And so I just want to make sure, and the final thing is, General Rice, allocating new planes, are we getting the right mix of getting the C-17s and the F-35s to the Guard and the Reserve to make sure that we can respond in a moment's notice? Are we getting the right mix in the acquisition and fielding of all of our planes?
We, Mr. Kelly, we have 5 capstone principles that define what the Air National Guard brings to the table. Things like we're experience-based, we're dual-role mission and doing domestic ops and overseas. And one of the things that provides us the ability to serve as an operational part of the force in the reserve component is the fact that we could get current and balanced modernization and recapitalization. And I'm here today to tell you, yes, we're getting concurrent and balanced modernization and recapitalization from the Air Force. Great support. Thank you, sir.
And very briefly, General Nolan, make sure you're letting these guys know, all the guys who are leaving the active component. I hate to lose that. They should go to the reserves. There's varying levels of which people can serve at points in their life. I'm a victim of that at some time. So make sure we don't lose a pilot, that we can maintain those years of experience that can go to the Guard and Reserve. And I have to yield back, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And thank you, Congressman Kelly. We now proceed to Congressman Vicki Hartzler of Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So General Noland, the end of the Cold War, along with other factors, resulted in the early termination of the B-2 program, which is at Whiteman Air Force Base in my district. And ultimately, as you know, we only have 21. Originally, we're supposed to have 132. And that, of course, has resulted in ballooning the cost of the per plane when they were being built, as well as supply chain issues, parts sustainment that we are still dealing with today. And the B-2 bomber, there was only aircraft in the bomber fleet that's able to operate in a contested airspace. Since we only have 20 B-2s, there's really less than that when you see how many can be combat coded. So can you comment on the importance of keeping the B-21 program on time and on budget and at the full number requested?
Congressman Hartzell, that's a great question. And it absolutely is an imperative for the United States Air Force that we move into great power competition, that we fully recapitalize our strategic bomber fleet. The 100 B-21s that General Rand, as a minimum, would like to buy, and our Chief and Secretary fully support, is critical towards our future capacity as we think about time-distance problems that we have. As you know, the B-2 strike that we did last summer all the way in Libya is an example of the ability to reach out and touch a target anywhere in the world and accomplish America's objectives. The B-2, the B-21, and the B-52 recapitalization with long-range munitions are critical towards our power as we move into great power competition, and keeping it on time is also really important.
So what is your perspective on when to retire the B-1 and the B-2 bomber, given that the B-2 can penetrate anti-access airspace and the B-1 cannot? Doesn't it make sense to retire the B-2 last to ensure the maximum amount of stealth bombers are available to prevent any gaps in capacity and capability?
Ma'am, I have talked to General Rand, and I've been in a room when the Chief and General Rand were talking about this. And combatant commander requirements are absolutely included in the planning as we move forward to make sure that we have no gaps in our penetrating capacity. The future of the Air Force is penetrating, non-penetrating, manned and unmanned, but this strategic bomber capacity to penetrate an enemy's airspace. And we think of the enemy's airspace not as an iron dome, but as Swiss cheese. So it's a team of team approaches to get in that Swiss cheese, open it, and they are committed not to retire anything and lose that capacity, so they're sequencing that.
Okay, and General Rice, I'm sure you're aware of that as well. I'm so proud of the way that Whiteman is certainly a joint force with both the 131st Bomb Wing, the Guard, with active duty 509th, totally integrated, working harmony every day. Now, airmen leaving the active duty component have an opportunity to continue their service in the Guard. However, if there is not a control grade available, those highly qualified and trained B-2 airmen cannot continue their service in the 131st Unit. So how does the current control grade cap impact the Air National Guard's ability to recruit and retain qualified airmen for full-time Guard positions?
That's a very relevant question, ma'am, because that's right in the heart of our personnel issues to grow readiness. We need congressional relief for control grade caps, no doubt.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that clear message from you on that, because I believe so as well. And so you would concur that there's a shortage of control grades, and how do you think that is impacting the Air National Guard?
I just would clarify something. I don't look at it in terms of a shortage or overage. I look at it as a limit. So right now we're limited on the number of control grades we have. That limit is stifling our ability to capture, back to our capstone principles, the experience base that is coming off of the active service. So we don't hire a lot of lieutenants and E1s and E2s. We hire a percentage, but not a lot. Most of our experience base is at the 10-year point, 15-year point, and more control grades on majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels, and E8s and E9s is critical for us to maintain that experience base.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Hartzell. I'm grateful that Congresswoman Madeline Bajayo has another question.
General Rydholm, I have a question for you. Thank you for taking time to meet with me on Monday, and I appreciate you making multiple trips to my office already this year to advocate for both the Air Force Reserve and the total force. Earlier this week, it was published that the Air Force plans to retire both the B-2 and the B-1 bombers as the B-21 becomes operational. So can you please comment on any intentions of the Air Force Reserve Command to absorb legacy bomber aircraft? And the second question is, what are the advantages or disadvantages of the Guard and the Reserve components maintaining a fleet that has been divested by the active duty component?
Okay, ma'am. Well, thank you for the question. I would like to answer it kind of in reverse order. I would say, and General Rice mentioned this one time before, we feel very strongly about the concurrent investment and divestment of weapon systems. So the legacy H model C-130 is probably a good example of that, because when you compare that, and the Guard and Reserve have many of those airframes, when you compare that airframe to the active duty J model, the crew complement's different, the training's different, the supply chain logistics are different, everything's different about it. So it's bad, but the Air Force as a whole is doing a great job when we expand into new weapon systems of going into those weapon systems holistically with a total force. From our perspective in the Reserve Command, we're currently participating in in the B-52 at Barksdale and in the B-1 at Dias. We anticipate, as has been stated earlier by General Nolan, that based on General Rand's plan of keeping a lot of B-52s around for a long time, up to 100 years, for the life cycle time on that airframe, that growth in that is actually a good thing, and we're looking at small growth in what we're doing at Barksdale. As far as the B-1 is concerned, our association there at Dias is fairly small. The footprint is working well for us, and there's talk of expansion there. And our expectation, as has been the case in other weapon systems, is that if we retire a bomber, we'll replace it with a new bomber. And therefore, our expectation would be that if we are currently associating in the B-1 at Dias and the choice is made to divest that aircraft in order to invest in the B-21, that we would invest with our active duty partners in that same airframe.
Okay. Thank
So-
you, General.
Yes,
My
ma'am.
time is so limited here. As a follow-up, do you anticipate these changes in the bomber fleet that would have any impact on the continuous bomber presence on Guam?
Well, I'm not sure that I can answer, but I think that one of the things that General Nolan mentioned was that we do not want to take down any weapon system until we know that we have at least a similar or a more capable weapon system replace it. Therefore, my expectation would be with the investment that we're doing into some of our older bombers like the B-52, et cetera, that the continuous bomber presence, which provides a tremendous deterrent for our nation, will continue.
All right, thank you. You know, we really want to keep those bombers there because of all the unrest in the Pacific Asia area at this time. In a hearing last month with this committee, GAO identified critical F-35 sustainment challenges, including limited repair capacity and spare part shortages. What steps does the department intend to take to ensure that the F-35 fleet meets production timelines while stabilizing operation readiness requirements? Would that be you, or?
Ma'am, that would be me.
General.
So the Joint Program Office, which is led by a one-star for United States Air Force, is looking into this, and it has to do with priority. The United States Air Force right now has the most F-35s of anyone out there. Yet the supply system right now kind of distributes them across the force. So the Air Force is looking, how do we do the redistribution of the supply system towards our priority missions? We have a priority mission overseas, and it demonstrates that when the airplane gets the part, the airplane flies extremely well. So they are looking at how we hold sustainment costs down while at the same time providing the parts that we need to get. And I think that when we can provide our plan back, we'll provide that to the entire committee, obviously, and hopefully that will help answer that question.
Okay, thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Councilman Badillo, and I'm grateful that Councilman Austin Scott has a further question.
General Redholm, did you, I think the statement that you made was don't take down one system until you know you have a replacement system that works.
Yes,
that-
sir.
I agree with that. Just for the record, the J-STARS works, and there is no replacement system that works. I would ask one follow-up to you. Would you be supportive of legislation that would ensure that Air Force Reserve, MilTechs are considered essential during, and hopefully we've taken government shutdowns off the table for the next 2 years with the bill that passed last week, so that they would be exempt from furloughs?
Well, I appreciate your efforts with the bill, and as you know, I was in your office the day before the government shutdown, and it was a difficult day for everyone. We absolutely support the exemption of MilTechs. As most of you are aware, a number of us had, after the Friday night shutdown, a number of Air National Guard, Air Force Reserve organizations had their drill weekends, and that had an impact on folks in a large degree. Of what we do on a drill weekend, and the heart and soul of most of our organizations are MilTechs. That 30% at the unit level are the people that are the bread and butter that run the daily operations in those organizations. And when we have to make decisions about which are exempt and which aren't exempt based on either emerging missions or named operations, it becomes very complicated. And it would be much better from our perspective if we, for once and for all, first and foremost, we'd get back to a stable budget, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. But if we can't get to that at a minimum, then we would look for support to help us get the exemptions for our Air Reserve technicians. Thank you, sir.
Well, I hope that we have an agreement so that the continuing resolutions and shutdowns and potential sequester is over with for at least the next 2 budget years. But I do think that we probably should continue forward trying to find a resolution of that in case we end up in the unfortunate scenario that we've been in because of a few hard heads up here that would rather prove a point than make a difference. So I look forward to continuing to work with you, and thank you all for your service.
Thank you.
And Congressman, I would like to add that it's not just a Air Force Reserve Miltech issue. It's a Guard and Reserve total force issue with dual status guardsmen as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you for correcting me, General Rice.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time.
And Congressman Scott, thank you very much for bringing up that very important issue and your insight. Also, General Nolan, General Rice, and General Reitholm, thank you for your candid remarks in helping this subcommittee understand how the President's budget request plans to restore and rebuild the U.S. Air Force, which we're so proud of. This has been a special hearing in that with the sound system on and off, depending on the moment, I want to thank our stenographers, Kelly Helmiston, for being so understanding as she sat there quietly and could hear all of us and correctly record this hearing. And for this, the hearing is adjourned.